All empires begin as spells, enchantments woven from fear of contamination. The occult is not what hides in the shadows, but what organizes them. The unseen physics of purity and filth. Politics has always been a battle over who counts as clean and who gets called the mess. Every empire builds its authority on a plumbing system, literal and symbolic, that decides whose bodies, neighborhoods, or ideas are treated as waste. The dark magician knows that disgust is a gate. It binds emotion to attention, turning revulsion into focus, focus into control. From ancient temples to Twitter feeds, rulers have used excrement not only as insult but as theology, a language that divides the pure from the polluted, the worthy from the disposable. When a leader talks about draining the swamp, cleansing the nation, or flushing out corruption, they're not just being crude. They're performing an old ritual of power, a rite of purification by projection. Tonight, we'll trace that ritual from myth to meme, through the underworld where waste becomes the language of command. What the priest calls sacred, the magician calls circulation. Both are plumbers of the invisible. We'll see how the gods leaked the world into being, how priests and kings learned to manage the runoff, and how, in our time, politicians weaponize the same imagery to define who belongs inside the walls and who gets dumped outside them. This isn't a history of toilets, it's a history of control. The politics of shit has always been the politics of sovereignty. Before there were kings, there were leaks. The earliest myths don't imagine creation as speech or command, but as overflow. The body of a god distinguishing itself from chaos by expelling part of itself. To excrete is to separate is to create. The boundary of being is drawn not with words but with waste. From the start, the sacred body is a system under pressure, and power means knowing how to release without dissolving. In Egypt, Atum stands alone in the primordial dark and brings forth the world, not by decree but by emission. His hand becomes his consort, his spittle the seed of air and moisture, creation as runoff. The Vedic Prajapati performs the same cosmic hygiene. Beings leak from his fluids, every god and creature an accident of divine digestion. These stories make the mess itself the mark of mastery. The deity who can leak and live through the leakage proves dominion over the border between inside and out. The Greeks turned the insight into comedy. Baubo revives the mourning Demeter not with wisdom but with obscenity, flashing her sex until the goddess laughs and life returns. Renewal arrives through indecency, the circulation of life restored by laughter and leak. The Aztec Earth Mother, Tlaltecutli, devours and defecates the material of the world, making soil from divine digestion. Across continents, holiness depends on flow. Stagnation is death. Religion begins as plumbing. So the mythic ruler is the first regulator of drainage. His body mirrors the cosmos. When he purges, the heavens clear. When he clogs, the realm festers. The primal theology of power is digestive. Order as metabolism, creation as controlled release. The gods did not command the world into being. They emptied themselves of it. And every empire since has followed suit, mistaking good management of the leak for divinity itself. Once the gods finished leaking, someone had to clean up. That job fell to the priest, the world's first manager of hazardous materials. In the beginning, holiness wasn't about insight or virtue, it was about waste management. The sacred wasn't what you believed, it was what you kept out of sight. From temple drains to dietary laws, religion became an early sanitation department, a system of ritual plumbing designed to keep the divine pipes clear and the human ones supervised. In Leviticus, cleanliness is not metaphor, but commandment. To bleed, to ooze, to touch the dead, all are temporary expulsions from the social body. The latrine must be outside the camp, and so must the unclean. Purity laws worked like zoning codes. They drew borders between sacred center and polluted edge. To defecate was to step beyond the wall. To purify was to return. The politics of exclusion was born in the name of hygiene. Whoever controlled what counted as filth controlled who counted as human. Other civilizations made the same connection. The Zoroastrians warned that waste invited demons. The Romans built the Cloaca Maxima, a sewer so grand they worshipped it as a goddess. Clean flow meant cosmic order and civic obedience. When the drains ran, Rome stood. When they backed up, the augurs read disaster in the stench. The sewer wasn't infrastructure, it was ideology. Keeping it flowing was how the empire proved itself uncorrupted. Over time, the priest's mop became the ruler's scepter. Political power inherited the theology of purification. To govern was to purge, to separate clean from unclean, loyal from impure, citizen from contaminant. Every act of cleansing, moral, racial, bureaucratic, descends from this priestly instinct. The language never changed, only the scale. The toilet became the throne, and the flush, the sign of authority. Every system that obsesses over purity eventually clogs. When order gets too clean, pressure builds, and somewhere, the body politic has to blow. In the Middle Ages, that release came through carnival, the annual reminder that beneath the robes and incense, everyone still leaks. For one wild day, the church let the people turn the hierarchy upside down. Deacons brayed like donkeys, bishops wore pig snouts, and the altar filled with laughter. The Feast of Fools wasn't rebellion, it was maintenance, the sacred sewer getting a flush. The point was not to mock faith, but to keep it from suffocating under its own sanctity. By letting the world fart in church once a year, the clergy kept the rest of the calendar intact. Better to have ritualized chaos than spontaneous collapse. Carnival was theology's pressure valve, an act of hygiene disguised as sin. The people ridiculed their betters, but in doing so, renewed the bond between ruler and ruled. After all, the king who could survive a little shit thrown his way proved he was strong enough to govern. Writers and artists carried the carnival spirit forward. Rabelais filled his books with giants who ate and defecated nations, turning digestion into philosophy. Painters like Bruegel turned peasant moonings into political diagrams. Their grotesque humor wasn't crude, it was critical infrastructure. Laughter was how societies drained their fear of authority. The fool's fart was civic therapy. But carnival is always temporary. When religion tightened its belt during the Reformation, the laughter dried up. The sacred ass was banished from the altar, and satire retreated to the margins, from parade to pamphlet, from street to print. Yet the need remained. Every age must find its fool, because when the powerful stop being laughed at, they start believing their own perfume. The body politic, denied its annual purge, begins to rot from the top down. When faith stopped laughing, it started straining. By the 16th century, the church had spent centuries hoarding holiness, gilding, bottling, and policing it until the system jammed. Salvation had become constipation. Indulgences sold like laxatives, grace rationed by the ounce. Into this blockage stepped Martin Luther, a monk with stomach troubles and a theology to match. His revelation wasn't ethereal, it was visceral. The soul, he decided, didn't need to clench, it needed to release. Grace was flow restored. Then came the printing press, the miracle of modern plumbing. Where monks had once copied scripture drop by drop, the press turned faith into circulation. Pamphlets poured from Wittenberg like divine diarrhea, unfiltered, unstoppable, public. Luther's words came wrapped in insult, fart jokes, and bodily imagery. His opponents replied in kind, depicting him as a bloated sow spewing heresy. The debate didn't ascend, it expelled. Theological argument became a fecal exchange: who produced purity, who spread corruption, who deserved the flush. That may sound crude, but it democratized discourse. The press made the bowel public. Anyone could print, purge, and pass it along. Ideas moved like digestion through the body of Europe, fermenting, stinking, vital. Out of that circulation grew what we now call the public sphere. Coffeehouses, pamphlets, taverns, each a latrine of opinion where citizens gathered to relieve themselves of thought. The act of publication was an act of release. The Reformation was less a new faith than a plumbing reform. It replaced the hoarded mystery of the altar with an open pipeline of words. It taught that salvation could move through common channels, that the soul could excrete its truth without priestly permission. The church lost its monopoly on purification. The public found its voice in waste. Modernity began not with enlightenment, but with a flush. The Enlightenment promised to clean everything. Europe declared itself disinfected, minds scrubbed by reason, streets lit and drained. Philosophy traded incense for plumbing diagrams. Order meant no leaks. The Age of Light was also the age of lime pits, powdered wigs, and perfumed virtue. Civilization, they claimed, had finally mastered its smell. But under every polished salon floor, the sewer still ran. Humming like a conscience the philosophers pretended not to hear. The same thinkers who praised rational clarity built entire cities on the model of a body, arteries for trade, bowels for waste, lungs for law. When the pipes worked, society was healthy. When they clogged, reformers called for cleansing. Politics became medicine. Filth was no longer sin but dysfunction, to be treated, not confessed. Yet class turned purity back into theology. The poor were labeled dirty by nature, their stench a moral failing. Cleanliness became a caste system disguised as progress. Satirists refused the perfume. Swift's Gulliver extinguishes a royal fire with urine and is punished for saving the palace the wrong way. Pope's Dunciad imagines stupidity as a rising flood of sewage drowning letters and learning alike. Hogarth and Gilray filled their prints with belching ministers and farting kings. Their art performed a civic cleansing of its own, not by hiding the excrement but by showing it. They reminded polite society that enlightenment without discharge is just constipation with chandeliers. By the century's end, Europe gleamed, paved, piped, and self-congratulatory. But reason's sparkle rested on the same old logic: purity through exclusion, order through disposal. The sewer was buried, not abolished. Civilization had merely moved its filth underground and called the silence enlightenment. By the 19th century, civilization claimed it had conquered filth. The miracle wasn't moral, it was mechanical. The flush toilet, the sewer, the soap factory. These were the new sacraments of modern faith. Joseph Bazalgette's London sewers turned plague water into public health and the engineer into high priest. The old theology of purity had become civic infrastructure. Salvation was a matter of drainage. But what vanished down the pipes didn't disappear. It reappeared as class. The poor were no longer sinful, they were unsanitary. Contamination replaced damnation as the mark of exclusion. Odor became evidence of inferiority. Hygiene, proof of virtue. The same logic that once banished lepers now policed neighborhoods. Clean meant respectable, productive, white. Dirty meant dangerous, idle, foreign. The body politic was redesigned as a plumbing diagram. The center pure and pressurized, the margins left to overflow. Empire exported this ideology abroad, selling soap with sermons attached. Sanitation became civilization's missionary weapon, and contamination its excuse. Inside the home, that gospel of purity turned inward. Privacy replaced ritual. The toilet made excretion invisible. The bourgeois conscience did the same for guilt. Respectability depended on what you could hide: your waste, your workers, your appetites. Freud would later diagnose neurosis as a kind of psychic constipation, the cost of repressing everything the city no longer wanted to see. The porcelain sheen of modernity was less about health than denial. Yet the symbol was perfect. Porcelain gleamed like theology, white, flawless, and cold. It transformed waste into a private sacrament of disappearance. Each flush rehearsed the same ritual: remove the contaminant, confirm your purity. The Victorians thought they'd buried the old religious obsession with filth, but they'd simply given it plumbing. The politics of contamination still governed who got to stay clean and who was left circling the drain. By the early 20th century, the world above ground gleamed, but beneath the tile and etiquette, something was fermenting. The pipes of progress hummed with denial. Civilization had perfected concealment, yet what it flushed away began to surface in new forms: neuroses, art movements, revolutions. Modernism was not born from cleanliness, it was the return of the repressed. What the Victorians buried, Freud and the avant-garde dug up. Contamination had become consciousness. Freud gave it language. Beneath the drawing room, he found a basement full of desire, shame and stink. The mind, he said, was a sewer system, repression the plumbing, dreams the overflow. The analyst replaced the priest, no longer absolving sin, but listening for leaks. When the unconscious spoke, it did so in the idiom of waste, slips, spills, emissions. Civilization, he warned, runs on the same logic as its toilets. Push down too much, and the pressure returns somewhere else. Artists turned that pressure into method. Joyce's Leopold Bloom defecates and thinks of love, the sacred and the scatological in a single breath. Duchamp signs a urinal fountain and calls it art, dragging the hidden object of hygiene into the gallery's glare. Manzoni cans his own feces and sells it, collapsing purity and commodity in one stroke. For them, contamination was no longer degradation, it was revelation. Waste proved that the body still existed under the empire of Polish. The sewer spoke, and modernism listened. The same century that built sewers under cities also built them under politics. Nations cleansed, borders sterilized, races sorted, all in the name of purity. Modernism's artists answered with filth, insisting that what society calls contamination is simply what it refuses to face. They made the leak sublime. The body's waste became proof of shared humanity, and the sewer, the last honest archive of civilization. The Enlightenment had buried the muck. Modernism read it as scripture. The language of waste has always been a manual for power. It teaches how to turn disgust into unity, impurity into identity, and overflow into authority. Most politicians learn to avoid that grammar, a few learn to wield it. Trump was one of the latter. He didn't stumble into the rhetoric of filth by accident. He recognized its force and deployed it with instinctive precision. The sewer, for him, wasn't metaphor. It was method. His rise began with the oldest gesture in that lineage: creation by emission. Every speech, every tweet, every insult performed the mythic act of the self-generating god. Power manifested as overflow. Where others polished, he leaked. The very lack of filtration became proof of vitality. His words poured out unprocessed, and in a culture sick of sanitation, that mess felt like medicine. Audiences responded as worshippers to the leak, authentic, real, uncensored. The performance of excess was the theology of truth. But he didn't stop at emanation. He mastered the priest's ritual of purification. Drain the swamp wasn't just a slogan, it was liturgy. Corruption was recast as contamination, and the cure was not reform but cleansing. Enemies were named in excretory terms: crooked, infested, shithole. He invited the crowd to join the purge, to chant away impurity. The politics of sanitation became the politics of belonging. To be clean was to be loyal. To be dirty was to be disposable. This was carnival theology in practice. The rallies revived the medieval feast of fools, a space where obscenity could reaffirm order. Vulgarity didn't damage him. It confirmed his sacred role as the fool king who says what others dare not. His mockery, like Rabelais' Giants or the peasant farces of Bruegel, served the same social function, a temporary inversion that kept the faithful from exploding. Each jeer and joke was a pressure valve. Laughter was not rebellion, it was maintenance. When he took to social media, he updated Luther's press for the algorithmic age. Each post was a pamphlet, each day a new purge. The content hardly mattered. What mattered was flow. Outrage had to circulate. The media, unable to resist the current, amplified it, becoming part of the plumbing. Where the Reformation's pamphlets flooded Europe with grace and bile in equal measure, Trump's feed flooded the digital commons with grievance and release. The form was 5 centuries old, the speed was new. He also learned from Enlightenment contradiction, the alchemy of filth and gold. His aesthetic married opulence and obscenity, the marble lobby and the locker room, the golden toilet and the talk of shitholes. The point was not irony but dominance. By flaunting both extremes at once, he embodied the entire hierarchy of disgust. The man too rich to be sullied, too vulgar to be shamed. The bourgeois fantasy of deodorized power returned as parody. Decorum was for the weak, only the strong could afford to stink. Television made the ritual seamless. The reality show stage turned purification into entertainment, a perfectly edited flush at the end of each episode. The catchphrase "you're fired" was less a decision than a symbolic expulsion, a weekly purge before a national audience. Later, politics followed the same rhythm. Every scandal was another episode, another release. The performance of chaos, contained just enough to be safe, trained the public to crave the next flush. And then came revelation. Like the modernists before him, Trump transformed contamination into truth. His offensiveness became credential. He wasn't polite because politeness was a lie. The dirtier he appeared, the more honest he seemed. It was Bataille's sacred waste recast for television. Filth as the proof of vitality, indecency as illumination. What the Victorians buried and the modernists exposed, he monetized. The sewer became brand. Through it all ran the same logic, the politics of flow. The leader expels, the crowd responds, the opposition absorbs. The cycle is self-sustaining because the relief is addictive. Each purge demands another. Each outrage prepares the next. This is not echo but execution, the conscious or unconscious use of ancient technique in digital form. The divine leak, the priestly purge, the carnival laugh, the pamphlet flood, the porcelain concealment, the modernist revelation, all flow together in one sustained act of governance by discharge. Trump didn't revive these patterns by chance. He recognized that beneath every civilization lies plumbing, and that whoever controls the valve controls belief. His ascent was not a departure from history, but its continuation. The latest, loudest chapter in the theology of waste. In him, the sewer finally speaks its own name. When the image appeared, a golden-crowned figure in a fighter jet releasing brown torrents over a crowd labeled "No Kings." It seemed at first too grotesque to be political, but it was. The meme wasn't parody or provocation, it was doctrine rendered in pixels. It compressed 5 millennia of symbolic plumbing into a single looping clip. The leak, the purge, the carnival, the pamphlet, the porcelain, the sewer, all returned in one composite gesture of rule through excretion. In that absurd AI tableau, the entire theology of wastecraft found its final form. The ruler aloft, excreting from above, performs the creation myth of Atum and the purification ritual of Leviticus in the same frame. Overflow equals power. Discharge equals cleansing. The sky itself becomes latrine and altar. To drop waste is to define what lies below as refuse, a cosmic hierarchy expressed through bodily metaphor. The image invites laughter, but its structure is priestly sovereignty by separation. The ruler is clean precisely because he can make others dirty. It is also carnival, but inverted. Once the fool mocked the king to release pressure. Now the king mocks the people to maintain it. The medieval feast of fools was a safety valve. This is a closed circuit. The ruler performs vulgarity not to equalize but to humiliate. The excreta remains untouched. The waste lands elsewhere. The laughter it generates is no longer collective but disciplinary. The carnival has been nationalized. The meme also continues the pamphlet tradition. A Reformation broadside translated into the language of the algorithm. Where Luther's prince showed popes defecating indulgences, the AI jet scatters digital waste across dissenters. It's the same grammar of heresy and purification, only automated. Every repost, every outraged commentary becomes part of the circulation. The excretion is the message, the virality, the proof of vitality. The public no longer reads, it reacts. The body politic no longer argues, it spasms. Even its visual polish carries Enlightenment irony, Top Gun cinematics over theological sludge. The juxtaposition of heroism and excrement is not accidental, it's a synthesis. The Enlightenment promised that reason would deodorize the world. The meme insists that deodorization itself has become deceit. Clean aesthetics now deliver dirty theology. The machine-polished image of filth completes the bourgeois cycle. The toilet goes public but remains gold-plated. Beneath the spectacle, the metaphysics remains exact. The meme divides humanity into three stations: the excreta, pure by dominance; the witness, purified through identification; and the target, defiled by projection. Each scroll through the feed reenacts the ritual. Those who cheer participate in the cleansing. Those who recoil become the dirt. The medium doesn't conceal the rite, it automates it. Every click is a minor ablution. And yet, the structure is perilous. In the theology of waste, the god who leaks risks being consumed by his own overflow. The same logic that elevates him, vitality through emission, also threatens to drown him when the current turns. Every purge invites reversal, every flush carries backflow. What was meant to cleanse can contaminate. The meme that crowns him may also mark him as the polluted one, the god whose own leak becomes uncontrollable. That is the ancient warning hidden in the joke. From Atom to Luther to Duchamp, every excretory myth ends with collapse. Creation devours itself, satire corrodes its author, the sewer floods the palace. The modern image adds only speed. In the infinite loop of the feed, the excreta never finishes. He drops waste forever, endlessly recycling his own emissions. The performance of power becomes its parody, the leak eternal. And so the cycle closes. The meme is not a rupture with civilization's story of waste, but its digital recitation. It condenses the myth of divine leakage, the priest's sanitation, the fool's laughter, and the modernist revelation into one consumable act of symbolic plumbing. It is, in short, Excreta et Imperium, the rule of shit as spectacle. The drain has gone electric, but the theology is the same. To rule is to discharge, to define oneself by what one expels, to rise by raining downward. From spittle to scripture, from drain to data, the waste has always found its way back. The meme only shows us what we have always believed, that filth is the most reliable proof of life, and that power, in every age, knows how to weaponize the flush.